Arknights!
Welcome. In this video, the event, Lingering Echoes, will be summarized. Throughout the video, there will be spoilers for the story of Arknights. If you don't want to be spoiled, please go and play the game. Hibiscus arrives in Weisheim's Afterglow district and is swept into an impromptu street performance before being whisked away by her colleague, Andante, to witness the beloved musician Herr Zerny perform outside Afterglow Hall. Despite being ill, Zerny plays for an enormous, adoring crowd and dismisses a noble's representative sent by the local ruler, Dame Gertrude Strollo, who attempts to curtail his performance. Inside the hall, a young Cabernet named Crede applies to Zerny's farewell concert, only to discover there's no monetary reward, a devastating blow as he desperately needs funds for his ailing grandfather's medical treatment. A nobleman named Ebenholz steps in, having been moved by Crede's cello playing, and offers to perform with him as an ensemble while personally funding his grandfather's care. Andante examines Crede's grandfather to find his original assimilation at a concerning level, recommending hospitalization, but the old man is deeply suspicious of both nobles and medical institutions and resists accepting help. Cray urges his grandfather to accept Ebenholz's money for treatment, but the grandfather insists the young man return it and warns him against trusting aristocrats with hidden motives. Hibiscus steps forward with a compromise, offering to house the grandfather at the Rhodes Island branch office, clearing her own bed and providing medication at partner prices to keep him comfortable and closely monitored. The grandfather grudgingly agrees, requesting one evening at home to pack his belongings before returning the following morning to begin his convalescence. Crede arrives late to the selections after a frantic morning securing his grandfather's admission at the Rhodes Island office, and Ebenholz greets him with thinly veiled concern, warning him to keep a close eye on how Rhodes Island treats the old man. Their performance before Zerny goes poorly, as the legendary musician harshly criticizes Ebenholz for ignoring Crede's cello and forcing his partner to accommodate him, ultimately dismissing Ebenholz outright while offering to consider Crede alone. Crede refuses to participate without Ebenholz, and the two are sent away, only to be called back the very next day when the original performers injure themselves in a bar fight, making Ebenholz and Crede the primary candidate for Morgen und Abend. Zerny gives them a single day to rehearse and sets a high bar for the evening, even gifting Crede a cello should they succeed. During the rehearsal at Crede's humble home, Ebenholz struggles repeatedly with a difficult mordant passage, but Crede's patient guidance helps them push through to complete the run of the piece. Meanwhile, Dame Gertrude reveals her true plan to Ebenholz over tea. She intends to use the acoustic and arts conducting properties of Afterglow Hall to trigger a resonance between Ebenholz and Crede, who, unbeknown to Ebenholz, also carries the voice of the mundane, and transfer Ebenholz's affliction into Crede. In exchange, Gertrude promises to free Ebenholz entirely from his noble identity, allowing him to live as a civilian, while she leverages the eventual return from the grave of the Graf Erdica for her own political ends. A shaken Ebenholz asks for time to think, and after he leaves, Gertrude receives a call from a mysterious superior who instructs her to monitor Rhodes Island's involvement with Crede and disrupt it if necessary, without drawing their attention. Separately, Hibiscus visits Zerny in hope of gathering information about the mysterious infected recovery phenomena, but Zerny is uncooperative until his caretaker Ursula inadvertently reveals that his health has improved markedly since the previous day. Gertrude, reflecting on all the moving pieces, resolves to spread a fabricated prophecy throughout the Afterglow to drive out the Rhodes Island investigators. Hibiscus spends the day canvassing the Afterglow, collecting blood samples and speaking with residents, including a good-natured food stall owner who feeds her fried sauerkraut and points her towards patients who have recently reappeared after long absences. Her evening takes a dangerous turn when a drunken man accuses her of stealing infected blood for dark arts, whipping a street crowd into a frenzy fueled by a mysterious prophecy supposedly issued by the long-dead Witch King. Andante tries to hold the mob back alone while Hibiscus calmly stands her ground, neither fleeing nor fighting, and appeals to the crowd's reason. but the agitator presses them further until a cello takes the blow of an arts attack meant for Crede, who had pushed through the mob to defend her. The crowd suddenly disperses when Ebenholz appears and plays his flute, his music sending even the most aggressive members fleeing in inexplicable fear. With the mob gone, Ebenholz and Crede bring the damaged cello to Zerny, who scolds the Afterglow on their behalf and provides a mass-produced replacement for the evening's assessment. Zerny listens to their practice and delivers another harsh verdict. Ebenholz is still showboating and forcing Crede to constantly accommodate him, but Crede shrewdly suggests Zerny accompany Ebenholz on piano himself, removing the safety net entirely. Performing without Crede's cover, Ebenholz manages to hold his own rhythm steadily enough that Zerny, albeit reluctantly, and with his standards lowered, declares them both passed. He warns them he may call for reassessment at any time before the concert, and Ebenholz promises to buy Crede a proper cello for the following morning, unwilling to let his partner perform on a borrowed instrument. Ebenholz takes Crede to the finest music store in Weisheim's cliffy patio to buy a new cello, and when a clerk tries to bar Crede entry for wearing commoner's clothes, Ebenholz drapes his own cloak over him and argues so forcefully that the store manager comes out personally to assist them. On the walk home with a new instrument, Crede hums cheerfully and tells Ebenholz he keeps small keepsakes to remember the people in his life: a bow from his teacher, a medicine bottle from Hibiscus, and a coin from Ebenholz, which briefly flusters the nobleman. Back at Zerny's, intensive solo practice sessions between Zerny and Ebenholz finally bear fruit when Ebenholz, playing in frustration, produces his best performance of the day, prompting Zerny to reveal that the piece was written with a rival in mind and that genuine emotion is precisely what the music demands. Zerny tells Ebenholz his real problem stems from an irresponsible teacher, and the two reach a fragile but genuine understanding. That evening, the group gathers unexpectedly for dinner at the Rhodes Island branch office, where Ursula has stayed to help Hibiscus cook after picking up Zerny's medicine. Over the meal, Hibiscus speaks warmly about her infected sister Lava back on the landship, and the shared dinner gives the unlikely group a brief sense of family. Later, Zerny visits Afterglow Hall for a pre-concert inspection and stumbles upon Dame Gertrude, who is already inside the locked lounge conducting her own preparations under the guise of checking the facilities. The two exchange their usual barbed pleasantries, with Zerny dismissing her fussing over the decor and Gertrude maintaining her composed, controlling demeanor, each clearly aware that the other's motives run deeper than concert logistics. Hibiscus arrives at Crede's home at dawn, red-eyed from a sleepless night, to deliver urgent news. The infected of the Afterglow are not recovering at all, but experiencing a dangerous false recovery, in which their body's compensation mechanisms mask rapidly worsening oropathy, and several are already entering the acute stage. After examining both Ebenholz and Crede and finding no obvious cause, she pulls Ebenholz aside to reveal that the phenomena began when Crede arrived in Weisheim and accelerated dramatically after the two met, making their resonance the likely amplifying force. She urges Ebenholz to leave immediately, and he asks for a few hours to investigate, then races to Gertrude, who confirms that Crede's voice of the mundane is damaged, and has been unconsciously leaking Art's energy into the surrounding infected, using the originum in their own bodies to fuel a false healing. Gertrude then reveals the full extent of her plan. After the concert transfers Ebenholz's voice of the mundane, she intends to kill Crede and disguise his body as Ebenholz's, framing his death as a consequence of his own corrupted arts, an act Ebenholz furiously rejects. Ebenholz attempts to flee Weisheim entirely, firstly visiting the customs office and then making his way to the city's edge to jump off, but Gertrude intercepts him and coldly points out that the nomadic city is moving and there's nowhere to go. Back at Crede's home, Ebenholz collapses with a searing headache, and as Crede plays the cello to soothe him, a haunting melody drifts through the room, the same tune Crede has been humming since they met. The melody triggers a buried flashback in Ebenholz, his earliest memory of being named Graf Ertica by a Lithuanian noblewoman, followed by the shattering discovery, as a child, that his guardian has always intended to destroy him quietly and claim Ertica for herself. Jolted awake by the cello's song, Ebenholz stares at Crede in stunned recognition, on the verge of realizing something about the boy that his fractured, pain-racked memory has not yet allowed him to fully grasp. Ebenholz rushes out again despite his poor health, driven by a half-formed plan involving the rumor spreading through the Afterglow, while Hibiscus goes to Czerny and urgently asks him to cancel or restructure the concert to prevent Ebenholz and Crede from performing together. Czerny refuses, insisting that he cannot upend the entire concert based on unproven fears, and Ursula diffuses the argument by taking Hibiscus outside, where the food stall owner and Ursula together recount the history of the Afterglow. Originally an industrial plate repurposed as an infected ghetto by the previous Graf Strollo. Its name a cruel noble joke implying that residents were living on borrowed time. Czerny, they explain, transformed the district by composing Morgen und Abend in grief after losing his closest friend, publishing it under his own name for the first time with Gertrude's early backing, which forced the nobility to acknowledge infected musical talent and gave the Afterglow its cultural and economic foothold. Meanwhile, Ebenholz tracks down Lachmann, the agitator who incited the mob against Hibiscus, but a Lithuanian intelligence agent named Begler intervenes at the critical moment, allowing Lachmann to slip into the sewers. Begler reveals he's operating under the Twin Empress's orders and attempts to detain Ebenholz as a suspect, but Ebenholz talks his way into being allowed to pursue Lachmann into the sewers under Begler's watch, coolly deflecting every threat with a sharp wit. Back in the Afterglow, Hibiscus is called away when Andante reports that Crede's grandfather has gone missing from the Rhodes Island office. At the same time, Crede, returning home after picking up his new suit from the tailor, hears a strange noise in the street and discovers what appears to be an Originum slug lurking nearby. Ebenholz and Begler pursue Lachmann through the sewers, where they discover he has deliberately agitated a massive swarm of Originum slugs that are now surfacing into the Afterglow, releasing toxic gas that is especially lethal to infected, and particularly dangerous to those already weakened by false recovery. They find a hidden laboratory behind a locked door in the sewers, and after knocking out Lachmann, part ways, with Begler retrieving research documents about the voice of the mundane, while Ebenholz rushes towards the sound of Crede's cello. Crede has been luring all the slugs towards himself with his playing, intending to die with them, having long known that his presence harms the infected around him and believing his death is the only solution. Ebenholz stops him and reveals the truth about the voice of the mundane, and the two perform a desperate, discordant duet with the two of their voices in attempts to drive the slugs back, succeeding, but leaving both men utterly exhausted and Crede on the verge of collapse. As they recover, Ebenholz and Crede share quiet stories of their vastly different pasts. Ebenholz imprisoned in the gilded cage of the spire, Crede and his grandfather wandering between hostile villages and narrowly escaping death, and Ebenholz breaks down in an apology, sensing a connection between their histories that he cannot yet fully articulate. Crede collapses from the slug poison shortly after, and at the Rhodes Island office, Hibiscus treats him while pressing Ebenholz for concrete evidence before she can act. Crede's grandfather then reappears after his mysterious absence, furiously confronting Hibiscus over how her words about false recovery nearly drove Crede to his death, and insists the voice of the mundane is real, swearing on his life, before directing them all to inspect the lounge of the Afterglow Hall, where Gertrude's modifications to the building are waiting to be uncovered. Czerny returns from the hospitals, having treated every copyright he owns, including the distribution rights to his farewell concert, to secure treatment for the slug poison infected, then collapses from the fumes himself. After recovering enough to move, he leads Ebenholz and Hibiscus to Afterglow Hall's lounge, where they discover Gertrude has converted the entire building into a massive arts amplification device that would exponentially intensify the voice of the mundane's resonance during the duet, effectively infecting all of Weisheim and leaving it permanently uninhabitable. Gertrude arrives and confronts them, offers Ebenholz one final chance to cooperate, and when he refuses, challenges them to fight outside, which Ebenholz wins, only for Gertrude to smugly point out that legally she holds all the power. Beegler then appears and arrests Gertrude not for the concert plot, but for conducting forbidden research into the voice of the mundane, taking her away while refusing Hibiscus access to the classified research files. With Gertrude detained and Crede still unconscious, Crede's grandfather reveals himself to be a veteran spy who originally found Crede as a failed experiment subject and chose to spare him, knowing the boy was condemned out of a rare moment of feeling. He explains that the voice of the mundane is the Witch King's lingering musical legacy, too dangerous and idiosyncratic to be used to the court, and that Crede was always meant to die quietly. When Crede wakes and insists on trying, Zerny studies the research notes and devises a desperate plan. He will compose a new piece in real time by listening to the two young men play Morgen und Abend, and drawing out the distinct melodies of their voices, then uses his own performance on the piano to separate and contain them, a process so overwhelming it causes him to cough up blood repeatedly throughout the night. By dawn, with Hibiscus watching helplessly as Zerny pours the last of his life into the composition, he completes the piece and collapses forward onto the piano keys. The farewell concert proceeds with Zerny, Ebenholz, and Crede performing Licht und Schatten. But as Zerny attempts to draw out the voices of the mundane through the music, he realizes too late that Gertrude has done far more than install amplifiers. She's converted the entire concert hall into a weapon that will collapse into a void and kill everyone inside the moment the voices become unstable. Meanwhile, Gertrude, under Beegler's watch, reveals to him that she orchestrated everything not out of loyalty to the Witch King's followers, but as revenge against the shadowy puppet masters who manipulated and murdered her family, and that her final trap is already sprung, with or without her. On stage, with No Way Out in the concert hall amplifying the dissonance to lethal levels, both Ebenholz and Crede separately resolve to sacrifice themselves to contain the voices, but Crede acts first, absorbing both voices into his own body, his flesh erupting into Originum crystals as he transforms into a monstrous figure echoing the Witch King himself. Beegler, recognizing the threat Gertrude still poses, stabs her before she can interfere any further, and Ebenholz battles the transformed Crede in the plaza, while Crede, in his final moments of clarity, urges his friend to strike him down and live fully in his memory. After Ebenholz defeats him, Crede's crystalline shell shatters and he briefly returns to himself, dying in Ebenholz's arms after asking him to live with generosity, to fight injustice, and remember their bond with laughter rather than grief. Hibiscus tends to Ebenholz's originum wounds, the crystals having infected him during the fight, while Ebenholz carries Crede's body to the concert hall lounge, refusing palliative services and sealing the room himself. The voice of the mundane, still lingering in Ebenholz's mind, attempts to speak in Crede's voice, but Ebenholz furiously silences it, warning it never to imitate his friend again. He leaves his flute beside Crede's body as a final token, the only keepsake he has, and walks out alone, newly infected, carrying Crede's cello. In the aftermath of the crisis, the Afterglow is spared from further repercussions when the Empress's voice instructs the local Herzog to leave the district alone. The Originum activated during the incident settles into an unexpectedly stable low activity rate, giving the infected residents a reprieve. Beegler tracks down Crede's grandfather and reveals the uncomfortable truth. He deliberately lured Crede to Weisheim, knowing Gertrude was closing in on him, gambling that forcing her hand early, before she could refine her research, was safer than letting her find him on her own terms. Zerny, still alive despite everything, requests deployment to the front lines with Rhodes Island, telling the doctor that surviving when he had already accepted death has left him wanting to fight for the infected in an entirely new way. Hibiscus, whose oropathy is worsened due to the exposure to the voices of the mundane, is reunited with her sister Lava, who is furious at her recklessness, and the emotional reunion ends with Lava fleeing the room after Hibiscus attempts, badly, to play her new flute. Ebenholz, now a Rhodes Island operator living under his assumed name, receives an unsigned letter from Lithinian, almost certainly from Gertrude, who survived, congratulating him on his freedom and enclosing a Lithinian civilian passport, along with the death certificates for both Grath Urtica and Crede. He burns all of it without hesitation, then picks up Crede's cello, the only keepsake he took from his friend, closes his eyes, plays a simple, cheerful Lithuanian folk song that Krede used to hum, as the sun brilliantly sets over the Rhodes Island landship. Thank you for watching. Please follow my Twitter and Blue Sky for updates, and please check out my other Uma Musume and Azure Lane videos as well. There will be a teaser out tomorrow for next week's character summaries.